the whole world. Every place, story, and passion lies right through there. This is where explorers and innovators go. This is the threshold of the next chapter of humanity. Join us. And together we will do more than see the world. We'll change it.
Please welcome the chairman of National Geographic Partners, Gary Knell.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. We're in the home stretch, and what a week it's been. Storytelling workshops and meetups and award ceremonies. How about last night? How great was that? Amazing presentations, food for the eyes, photography, films, and most importantly, conversations around really big new ideas to help us keep, as our friends from Rolex like to say, our planet perpetual. First, I want to welcome the tireless chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company, Bob Iger, here today. Bob, welcome. I think when we took Bob through the photo archives yesterday, I think he knew more about the pictures than we did. I've quickly learned that Bob is not only an inspirational leader of an amazing company, he is a curious student of the world, which only adds to his power to inspire the hundreds of thousands of cast members who come to work each morning fired up and ready to go. And I want to welcome the other board members of National Geographic Partners here today. Our new colleagues, Nancy Lee, the chairman's chief of staff, who in a short time has performed miracles for us, unlocking the Disney assets, and Bob Chapek, who, other than overseeing nearly 200,000 employees in parks, experiences, and products, is one of the most focused executives and effective executives I've ever had the pleasure to work with. He will do amazing things for us as a new colleague. So we're really glad to have you on our side now, Bob. It's kind of like getting Lionel Messi on our team, right? He's a soccer player, for those of you who know. Okay. And of course, Kathy Kennedy here from Lucasfilm, welcome. It's our honor to have you here and welcome you to Washington. And of course, my day-to-day boss, Peter Rice, who moved with us from 21st Century Fox to Disney. Peter, perfect timing, has been, that was amazing. Chris queued you up to watch, all right. Peter has been National Geographic's champion for over a decade. He's always inspired us to dream bigger, to capture the essence of what National Geographic stands for, to work with the best creative people on Earth, and to be laser focused on the mission at hand. He is responsible for more Emmys and Oscars than nearly anyone in Hollywood. And I can say there's not a single writer, producer, director, or executive who doesn't want to work with Peter. And he now bleeds yellow. How cool is that, okay? And special welcome to Fred Ryan, who volunteers for all of us on the NGP board since he has nothing else to do as publisher of the Washington Post. He's a trusted friend of presidents, entrepreneur, a visionary, protector of journalism, brilliant business executive, and an incredible board member. He's not here today, but Kevin Maroney lends his acute financial acumen to National Geographic to drive us towards greatness. And of course, Jean Case, our chairman, who lives by her credo, be fearless. And like Alex Honnold, I have taken those words to heart. Well, sort of like Alex Honnold. And thank you, Tracy, for your 10-year commitment to National Geographic and helping organize the society in new ways to drive impact. So much has been said already in these introductory frames, I think. I thought I'd simply give a short, quick perspective on this final morning. 18 months ago, Kim and I hiked the Salcantay Trek at 15,000 feet across the Andes to see Machu Picchu. Kim finished first, of course. Okay. There was symbolism in that trek. We were walking the steps of Hiram Bingham, who 100 years earlier, with a grant from National Geographic, by the way, it was a 9-3 vote on the board, actually, for that grant, rediscovered the ancient civilization of the Incas. Of course, I'd always thought that he turned a corner on this impossible trek he was on back then. And there it was, half buried and untouched by human hands for centuries. But I learned in Peru from Johann Reinhardt, or someone, I think, that in fact he was walking along with his team from Yale and ran into a 12-year-old boy. This is a true story. They inquired whether there was anything interesting, and he said something like, "Look over there, dummies." And there it was. His football field was the ancient city of the Incas. So much for explorers from Yale. Now I want to know, did that young man get an honorary degree? Okay, just saying, okay? But it also gave me insight on a question I'm often asked as a CEO, especially in media today. When do you think we will be out of the woods? And the answer is, it's the wrong question. For we're not looking to leave the trek. We're looking to find the next mountain to explore, the next river to navigate, the next marine sanctuary to protect, the next elephant herd to protect from the human scourge of poaching for profit. Victory is getting to the next peak, returning to refuel, and conquering the next one. All of us in this room, whether they are climbing the Himalayas or diving into our ocean or supporting this work by sharing their resources with us, have the same passion. We wake up every day around our campfire, suit up our backpack, and head back out on the trail. And the fact is, there are millions of people who follow us figuratively or literally. This is a magical brand. It was built by the Bells and the Grosvenors. It was expanded by the Fahey's and the Cases, and the Baileys and the Goldbergs and the Monroes and the Ulicas. Visited by presidents and heads of state. A base camp for hundreds of millions of people, 111 precisely, who follow our heroes on Instagram. Yes, more than Nicki Minaj, Khloe Kardashian, and the other Jennifer Lopez, okay? They follow us because they want to wear the rectangle. Some don't know how. Some don't have the resources to leave their surroundings. Some just want to find an easier way to join up. And that's our challenge. Dreaming how big National Geographic could be. As you've heard all week, the planet is at a crossroads. There's never been a more important time than right now to get the gear for the trek distributed. First, we make more grants. Then we hire more diverse employees. We perform more scouting for grantees. We do more training. We get into more classrooms. We produce more documentaries. We inspire more photographs. We find more stories to tell. Our job then here is to curate them and put the best ones forward. Fewer, bigger, better, as my new colleagues from Disney say, so that the next great peak is in sight for people to climb and to aspire to. For we will never be out of the woods. We must stay on the trail. We are the trek leaders, the Sherpas for our planet. The world needs us. We are National Geographic. Thank you.
Please welcome wildlife filmmaker and Please welcome wildlife filmmaker and National Geographic fellow Sandesh Kadur.
Good morning, survivors. It's day 3 of the Explorers Symposium. Welcome back. Welcome to all our live stream audiences around the world. Now, we don't have very much time today. It's good. You won't have to see me up here for much longer. So we only have a few hours. It's going to be tight. It's going to be short, but it's going to be exciting. But I'd like to give a big round of applause to all our award winners last night. So let's get right into it this morning, because this first panel includes a group of people who've just come off the highest place on the planet. They've just come from Mount Everest. So to welcome them, I'd like to get Senior Program Manager of Life at the Extremes for National Geographic Society, Aurora Elmore. Welcome. Hey.
Thank you, Sandesh, and good morning, everyone. It's really great to be with you all today. This morning's panel will discuss the first major component of Life at the Extremes initiative, an effort to fill critical knowledge gaps in our understanding of climate change impacts on natural systems on Earth. It also renews a robust partnership between National Geographic and Rolex to explore some of the most extreme environments on the planet. Before I introduce today's panel, I'd like to offer a huge thank you to Rolex, our funding partner, as well as esteemed guests from the government and embassy of Nepal, and all of you in the audience today. I'd also like to welcome National Geographic's new Vice President for Life at the Extremes, Dr. Tegan Blaine. It's now my esteemed pleasure to announce for the first time that National Geographic, in partnership with Tribhuvan University in Nepal, has just completed one of the largest expeditions in National Geographic's 130-year history. This is believed to be the most comprehensive scientific expedition to the tallest mountain in the world, Mount Everest. The incredibly successful Everest expedition involved a 46-member team conducting research in 5 scientific disciplines: mapping, glaciology, geology, meteorology, and biology. It also strategically communicated this important work to our global audiences. This amazing team didn't just complete work. They achieved incredible success under extreme conditions and at extremely high altitudes. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce you to some of my heroes. You're about to meet the team leads on National Geographic and Rolex's Perpetual Planet Extreme Expedition on Mount Everest. Dr. Anand Gajral, geologist from Tribhuvan University in Nepal, Dr. Tracy Simon, biologist from Wildlife Conservation Society, Dr. Baker Perry, meteorologist from Appalachian State University, Dr. Tom Matthews, climatologist from Loughborough University in England, Tyler Dinley, NGS storytelling producer and Everest media team leader, and finally, Dr. Paul Majewski, director of the Climate Change Institute at the University of Maine and lead scientist for the Everest expedition. Thank you all. Each one of you has just returned from Mount Everest, and most of you spent time at Everest Base Camp, which is 5,380 meters, or 17,600 feet above sea level. This expedition lasted 2 months, and I want to start by asking just how hard is it to walk to base camp? And how hard is it to not just live and be at base camp, but also to work at those extreme elevations? So Ananta, how do you walk to base camp? What's the trek like?
Yeah, once we get in Namse at around 3,500 meter altitude elevation, and we feel we are in surrounding of the Mount Everest area, and we spend 2 nights to acclimatize in the mountain, and then start trekking from the Namse, gaining not so much elevation, and then we see a lot of Sherpa people surrounding the Namche and on the way to base camp and Gokyo Lake. And then actually we also see a lot of yaks and trekkers on the way. And Sherpa people are really very generous, and they show a wonderful hospitality. And then we slowly gain elevation. When we arrived in Dingboche, or located at about 4,400 meters, then we gain a rapid elevation of about that is we say to the base camp area. It could be the nick point, so it could be 600 meter or 700 meter, and then we arrived in Lobuse, and then in base camp area at about 5,400 meter. And one way, and another way is from Namche to Gokyo Lake area. And in the Gokyo Lake area, we also gain slowly elevation. And then finally, we arrived at around 4,800 meter altitude. So the trekking route is sometime in average 3 feet, and there are a lot of trekkers and a lot of yak transporting a lot of goods, and it could be dusty, and people could be lot, but once we look surrounding the mountain, and every people fell in love with the mountain, and they forget the way actually.
Yeah. You just mentioned that the trekking route is very, very narrow. Here we see Paul walking on, it looks even less than 3 feet, also in very snowy conditions. Paul, how hard was this trek?
Well, anytime you work at 5,000 meters, 6,000 meters and higher, which part of our team did, it's very serious. But we also have a very experienced team, which is important to note. We spent a great deal of time planning how long it would take us to get up there, make sure that everybody was climatized. We're very proud of the fact that nobody got mountain sickness, which is very important. It's extremely debilitating. So it's non-trivial getting up there. It is certainly non-trivial living there. You have 50% of the oxygen at sea level. When you go up to about 6,100 meters, you have even less, obviously, and when you get up to the top of Everest, you have 1/3 of the oxygen at sea level. So if you want to see what it would be like, you could put a plastic bag on your head and walk around for a while.
We do not recommend this. Do not do this.
That's right. Don't pay any attention to that. Sorry. I'll stop there.
So speaking of the top of Everest, Tom and Baker, you were part of the team, including 15 Sherpas, 3 filmmakers, and another scientist, Mario Pataki, whose goal was to get as close as possible to the summit of Mount Everest, a whopping 8,848 meters, or 29,029 feet above sea level. Can you tell us more about what it was like in those final hours above 8,000 meters, and what drove your decision of how high to climb?
Sure. So we left Camp 4, which is around 8,000 meters, early in the morning, well, late at night / early in the morning. It was 11:30 p.m. And as you climb away from Camp 4, you enter this zone called this area called the death zone. So you're climbing into altitudes that are sort of not sustainable for humans to exist in for long. So you're certainly aware that you're entering this extreme environment. And I suppose the way that we felt that was primarily through the temperatures. Even though it's a lack of oxygen that the death zone is defined by, we had temperatures of close to -30 on the way up, and it took a toll on our bodies and our equipment. So I had some minor frostbite, and Baker here had an oxygen mask that froze. So the journey up was certainly not straightforward for him. And it's kind of the atmosphere becomes more tense as you leave Camp 4. You pick it up in sort of our own conversations with each other, but also the Sherpa are more tense because this is an environment that you don't want to spend much time in. So because of that, the extreme environment, we're trying to move quickly, and we did try to move as quickly as possible up away from Camp 4 and towards the summit. And we started making very good time. We were moving quickly, quicker than we'd moved throughout the period that we'd been climbing higher on the mountain. But then we ran into the back of a queue of climbers. So we covered a lot of ground in about 3 or 4 hours, close to 400 meters, and then spent some time behind a queue, which was both frustrating. If you've ever been queuing for anything, you know that that's just a frustrating way of moving. But on top of that, there was the knowledge that it becomes more unsafe for everybody. We were a large group trying to move quickly, and this was not good. So obviously, when we got to this place called the balcony, safety was our sort of very much on our minds.
Yeah, and to pick up and answer the second part of that question, what was the decision making to stop there? I mean, obviously, we were all frustrated as a team at the slow pace, and our Sherpa team leader Panuru, who has 17 Everest summits behind him and is incredibly experienced. He, along with the rest of our Sherpa team, in consultation with our science team and media team, recognized that it was going to be a tremendous time and energy commitment to continue on that would have put our lives at risk. And so, in consultation, we recognized that if we stopped at the balcony, we could still meet the science goals and also make sure that we were as safe as could be and have the opportunity to get down. And so safety was an important consideration, and we had tremendous respect and confidence in our Sherpa team and that decision-making process.
We are so glad that you made that decision and that you prudently, yes. Yeah, all along, keeping our team safe was our top priority. So that must have been a very difficult decision, but you were able to be incredibly successful. So please tell the group what you accomplished.
So there at the balcony, perched on the side of the mountain, this is on the southeast ridge of Everest, we found a tiny outcrop of rock, and were able to successfully, in a very small area, install the highest weather station in the world. And let me just add that our Sherpa team was incredible in this effort. I mean, they had trained and we had practiced this, and I think their brains work a little better up there at that elevation than ours do, and they were absolutely phenomenal in that team effort. So.
And Tom and Baker are numbers 2 and 3 from the right in this photo that you're looking at here today, celebrating.
And perhaps if I can just add a little more detail. So this is the highest weather station that's ever been installed, but we actually broke the record the day before for the highest weather station currently operating in the world, and we installed a station at the South Col, which you can just see in the picture behind us there. It's that low point before you go back up to Lhotse, which is a very significant peak that's the next mountain over there. And together, those two weather stations will give us the first ever concurrent measurements or simultaneous measurements in the death zone, so 8,000 meters plus. And we hope them running together, the longer they run, the better the chance they have of allowing us to make weather forecasts a bit better up there, make the mountain hopefully a bit safer for climbers. And if they last a long time, then they'll give us more insight to how the climate's changing right up there on the roof of the world.
Great, that was an excellent segue, because I want to now back up to why we were on this mountain in the first place. Paul, the impetus of the expedition was about understanding how climate change is affecting critical support systems for Earth, in this case, high mountain water towers, the alpine glaciers that store water. As ECMOD recently reported, the Hindu Kush Himalaya provide water resources to 1/5 of global population. These glaciers are likely to shrink dramatically by 2020. how do researchers like you and your team study the state of these Himalayan glaciers? And what is an ice core? We're about to see a picture of it in just a minute.
Well, perhaps the best way to start off the conversation is to sort of give you a feeling for what it's like to be at high elevation. Most people who go to the top of Everest are obviously interested in having their picture taken, coming back down again. On the way up in any high elevation, literally all you can think about is the very next step. And your goal is typically something that's 20 feet away. So your world is very small. Our science team obviously had a very different goal. Our goal was not to get to the summit necessarily, although that would have been fine if it had been done. Our goal was to work along the way, and it requires tremendous amount of exertion, number one. And number two, it requires dedication to what you're doing. We did this because we wanted to collect multidisciplinary scientific information from the most iconic mountain in the world. The things that we find on the top of this mountain, ranging from the immediate weather, which we can now see, to things like ice cores, which are basically buried weather stations that allow us to go back in time decades, hundreds of years, potentially thousands of years, are the things, along with understanding the distribution of glaciers today versus the past, along with understanding what sort of organisms live there, and along with having excellent maps which we can use to judge how much this area is changing, are all of the pieces of information that are necessary to not only understand how much change has occurred in this iconic place, which is important to so many people in the world, but also to make better predictions for the future. And that's our primary goal, is to make more reasonable, more plausible descriptions of how this area will change, and to be able to apply these to mountainous areas, and in particular the Khumbu Valley and the people of Nepal. Nepal opened up to us basically their heart, the most important thing that they can offer us. And it's our requirement or our privilege now to try to put the science together and be able to talk about its impact on hydroelectric power, agricultural activities, quality of life, tourism, and all of the things important to these people.
Great, thanks, Paul. Behind us right now, you'll see a picture of Mario taking the highest ever ice core. Can you talk about what's happening in this photo, and especially what it would take to complete this endeavor?
This is Mario Potocki, a PhD student in our institute, who's worked with me for many years, extremely experienced. His goal was to collect this ice core. It is from the highest glacier on Mount Everest, no doubt, therefore, the highest glacier in the world. And he's drilling down roughly a 3-inch diameter core under extremely strenuous conditions. He has obviously the same Sherpas who were helping Tom and Baker, helping him. He was able to go down 10 meters. May not seem like a lot. A lot of the ice cores we've collected are thousands of meters. But at this elevation, it's going to provide us with an understanding of past temperature, precipitation, how much snow falls, where the air masses come from. Do they come from the south in the monsoon? They come from the north Tibetan Plateau, which is the key to understanding the cycle of the monsoon. From this, we can also tell pollutants that have impacted the area as a consequence of human activity and what their levels were in the natural climate, so that we can make better, have better directed legislation for how to keep our environment clean, and a variety of many other things, which we will find out about once we analyze this core. But it was a remarkable feat in a remarkable place. People know nothing, literally, about areas above 5,000 meters, much less 6,000 or 7,000 meters. And here's an ice core from just over 8,000 meters that will unlock a lot of secrets.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of the other hard parts about the ice core is then you have to get it back down, and you have to get it all the way to University of Maine, still cold. Tracy, you led the biologic research on this expedition. also having to deal with getting samples back down off the mountain. We've heard how hard it is for humans to survive at extreme elevations. What kind of creatures are living up there? What did you find when you were assessing the biodiversity of Mount Everest?
Yeah, I mean, most people don't think of all the creatures that live up at these extraordinary elevations, but we actually found quite a bit of biodiversity. There are spiders and arthropods. We discovered a new elevation record for a centipede at 5,500 meters.
We're going to need to clap for that one too.
We also
records being broken by this team.
We also discovered an elevation record for a caddisfly, which is related to a moth, at 5,600 meters. And in addition to that, we found plants and fungi, mammals and birds. And the whole reason that we're studying this is we really want to understand how high does life go? You know, how do species live in extreme environments? And what sort of adaptation strategies have they developed to be able to live right on the edge of the most harshest ecosystems? And all of these species, they're all indicator species, and they can tell us a lot about how climate change is impacting things like food resources and water resources and habitat. And the great thing about working in high mountain environments is that we can, as scientists, we can extract these signals, and that's because the signals are amplified in high mountain environments. One of the critical things that we did on this expedition was to establish a high altitude vegetation monitoring site. This is called a GLORIA site, which stands for Global Observational Research Initiative for Alpine Environments. And this was installed by Dr. Suresh Gamir and his botany team from Tribhuvan University. And what a GLORIA site is, it's a vegetation monitoring site where they set up the plots on 4 different summits at different elevations. And they map everything that's on that summit. They look at all the species, they quantify it, and the idea is to go back every 5 years and reassess. And this gives you quantifiable evidence of how environmental change and climate change is impacting species. And the wonderful thing about the GLORIA approach is it's standardized against the whole GLORIA network, so we can then compare it to all the other GLORIA sites in high mountain environments to really build a comprehensive picture about how climate change is impacting the environment.
That baseline data is going to be invaluable moving forward. Thanks, Tracy. On to you, Ananta. Ananta, you were the head of the geology team on this expedition, and you had a massive undertaking. However, some of the most challenging geologic sampling happened in a place you might not expect. A glacial lake in the Gokyo Valley. Can you explain to us what you're doing in this next photo and what lake sediment cores tell us about climate change?
This is a lake close to the Gokyo Lake, second lake. We use core gravity-driven percussion core driller, and then we recovered lake sediment from the bottom, and that lake sediments have recorded the environmental condition within the lake and surrounding the lake. And environmental condition from the core sample means the core can tell us about its physical parameter and chemical parameter as well as biological parameter. And these parameters within the lake and surrounding the lake watershed area. So in the watershed area, what was the environmental condition? That means what was the ice snow cover condition, or was it a snow-free area? And that means temperature and precipitation. is the area was cold or warm, and during the cold time there could be there will be a lot of snow cover, and there will be less vegetation and less interaction between vegetation and superficial rock materials, and as well as biological materials. And then during the warm period, there could be interaction between air, temperature, and then water with the rocks, and rocks can alter and change into new mineral and fragmented, and these all sediments can flux into the lakes, and that record, the sediments record the surrounding of the environments. So we can say from the lakes whether the lake was frozen and how much the productivity inside the lake, one thing. And another thing, if the lake is not frozen, then what type of productivity is there? And all these biological sediment, clastic sediment derived from outside of the lake, all decanted, and sedimentation records the occurrence of these changes over the time.
Great, thanks, Ananta. So we've heard a lot about the different types of science. This is just a little bit of what was accomplished on this expedition. Tyler, you led the media team that was charged with communicating this important science through video, photo, some of which we've seen today, VR, and also educational materials. I'm curious what it was like as a storyteller to be embedded with these scientists, and how much have you learned? Are you going to go get a PhD now?
I don't know about that. Yeah, this was a very challenging expedition. I mean, just with the size and scope of the expedition itself, this was 5 science initiatives, and I think up to 10 groups of scientists just spread out over the Khumbu. So 2 months for an expedition sounds like a long time for media coverage, but when you have 10 groups of scientists spread out, overlapping over 2 months, becomes quite a challenge. The media team on any project always has to be 2 steps ahead of whatever they're covering. And so, of course, it's a challenge for the scientists, but it's a different challenge for the media team because, and especially on a mountain, because we have to be running up and down this thing. And luckily, we had a pretty savage group of filmmakers and photographers that are all mountain people, and they can, they're able to accomplish these feats and capture, I think, capture the science, but also the essence of the expedition.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favorite photos from the expedition that we're looking at now. It's a photographer just hanging off an ice cliff, but also bothering to take a picture. This is what it takes to actually capture this kind of amazing science in such an extreme environment.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this picture is of Mark Fisher, who led the high altitude science coverage, and I don't think there's anyone like him. He can really cover some ground.
Yeah. Which camp is in the background here? Camp 3. How high is it?
7,020. Yeah.
7,120 meters high. So
casual, very casual. Great. I want to ask some rapid fire questions now. One of the interesting things I've learned through you all being up on the mountain for so long is that it's hard to keep weight on at the mountain. How much weight did everyone lose? This is a new diet you're pitching, so you should tell people how much weight you've lost. Paul?
20 pounds.
Ooh, I think that's the winner. Tyler?
11.
7 kilos, whatever that
is. Which makes him the winner.
15, 16 pounds.
I lost 8 pounds.
I lost 8 pounds.
I did not actually lost so much.
Next time you'll go on the Everest diet.
But I'm happy to say I put most of it back on.
I think lots of people have said the same. What was the highest elevation you reached?
I reached around 5,400 meters.
Tracy?
5,650 meters.
8,430 meters.
8,431.
I knew that was coming.
17,006, I think.
Feet.
Feet. I decided to go to space.
In a previous time, 7,000 meters. On this one, 5,640.
Yeah. It's just gargantuan what you all have accomplished. I also want to ask, what was surprising? This team is very accomplished. They've spent time at elevation before. What was unique and what was really exciting about this expedition? We'll start with Anand again, go down the line.
Oh, for me, actually, if we look at the whole mountain range from south to north, from 200 meter to 8,800 meter, in a about 100 kilometer distance. So the people in the southern part believe river as a sacred river, any river. In the mountain also, above 4,000, around 5,000 meter, people's sacred the lake. One is that is one thing, and another is the people climbing in the high altitude area with porters, say, and they are carrying heavy load with a music player. And they have music, they play a music, and they sing, and they are very happy, and that is wonderful for me.
Yeah, it's really great. Tracy, how about you? What surprised you?
I think the thing that surprised me most is one of the days my partner Anton and I were heading up Kongmala Pass, which is around 5,500, and it had snowed the night before. And as we were heading up, we came across fresh snow leopard tracks, just walking up the trail, the same trail we were using. And then we followed the tracks, and then they overlapped with fox tracks. And that was just so extraordinary to me, because the trail we were on is a very well-trafficked trail. At least 100 people a day are probably traveling this. And they're sharing, they're coexisting with us. And most people don't even know it. I actually pointed out the tracks to a few of the trekkers, and they're like, wow, really? And it sort of makes you aware of how mindful visitors to the park and people going up there have to be, because we're sharing this habitat, and it's theirs too.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to skip over you two to Tyler.
Surprise? I wouldn't say much of a surprise, but more of a reminder of how important it is not only to work with the local people in this region, but to understand their own knowledge of what's happening up there in regards to climate change, and really, I guess, sort of comparing notes with what we're discovering with the science. And that's just something that should be applied to any project that we work on, I guess.
I would say the same thing that Tyler did. We're really eager to integrate this science. It's multidisciplinary, and to find ways to apply it so that it'll have value. And using the same words that Tyler did, rather than be surprised, I was just really happy with the fact that we had a very large group of people, from everybody from Sherpas and porters to scientists to National Geographic staff to media. We all spent a lot of time together. And as happens always, but the larger the expedition, the more diverse than this was, it was really remarkable to see how hard everybody worked, how well everybody got together, and I'm really proud to have been involved in that.
Yeah, can I just build on that? I think what is not necessarily a surprise, but what just amazed me was the resiliency of our team. I mean, we faced a lot of challenges. A lot of us, probably 90% of us, had upper respiratory infections, sicknesses of some point. There were other challenges brought on by the weather that compressed the number of summit days. And to achieve the successes we did was a really remarkable testament to the strength of our Sherpa team, our science team, our media team, and our Nepali support staff, and our partners at Tribhuvan University. And so I think that really stands out to me.
Go ahead, Tom.
So what really surprised me, I think, was the space that Baker took up in the tent. No, in a more serious one to end on, we now We have weather data streaming, so we can see in real time what's going on. And we knew these environments were extreme. We've already recorded winds equivalent to a Category 2 hurricane at the South Col, and this is the quiet period. So we're both excited and a bit apprehensive for what the winter brings. We hope that those weather stations hang on. But the data are now live on the website, as I understand.
Not quite, but they will be later today. But good flag. Does anyone else want to have anyone else have anything they're surprised about?
I'll just say one more thing. I'd like to thank National Geographic for an amazing opportunity. We're all very proud to be involved with National Geographic, and the opportunity to work so closely with the media and to be able to tell a story that we hope will turn out to be an important story makes us feel very good.
Great, not just for science, but for the world, we hope. So I want to return that thank you. Thank all of you for being on the panel today. I'd also like to make a really clear point of thanking everyone who couldn't be on the stage today. So we have quite a few other members of our expedition team in the audience, and I'm going to ask them to stand. The amazing Sandra Elvin, Alex Tate, who I'll talk about again in just a minute, Sam Shaleen, Corey Jaskolski, Chris Milburn, Kenny Broad, Freddie Wilkinson, and Vivek Giri. I want to thank you all for the incredible work that you've done, not just over the last 2 months of this expedition, but for a year leading up to it to plan and make this a success. Welcome home to all of you. Congratulations on all the incredibly successful expedition results. And we have one final important Everest expedition event that will happen at noon today. Mapping was a critical part of our work on Everest, and Alex Tate, who's the National Geographic geographer, led the mapping team for the expedition and will host a special session so you can see some of the amazing mapping work that his team did using drones, LiDAR, helicopters. It will take place in the cafeteria today. I encourage you all to go at noon, and we'll also include a virtual reality experience of base camp so you can get to understand what our team experienced on the mountain. Once again, thank you to everyone. Job extremely well done. Thank you all.
What an amazing journey into the Himalaya. So the first time that I went into this incredible mountain range was thanks to someone probably in this audience right here, Professor Kamal Bawa. Are you here? Dr. Bawa? So he offered me a free trip to the mountains, to the Himalaya, to see this great mountain range, and I'm a sucker for a free trip, and I said yes, and he left me there for 5 years. And we worked on a book titled Himalaya Mountains of Life. That was our project together. And I came back to the US after that, and the immigration people stopped me and they said, why were you out of the country for so long? I said, well, I was working in the Himalaya. And he turned to me and said, Himalaya, what's that? All of a sudden, 5 years in the Himalaya, and I suddenly don't know what the Himalaya is. I stepped back and I said, the Himalayas? He's like, oh, the Himalayas. Welcome back. So next, we're going to hear from 5 National Geographic explorers who are each carrying on this incredible legacy. Each of them have 3 minutes to share their update from the field on their current projects. First up, underwater archaeologist and National Geographic explorer, Guillermo de Anda. Welcome.
This journey through one of my offices. I am an underwater archaeologist, and I work on one of the most amazing places in the world, probably the last wild place in Mexico on the underground. But you know, these are very vulnerable aquifers, as all the aquifers in the world, because nobody can see them. So one of our missions is trace and map the amazing geography of the invisible and see what is going on there. If there is a little bit of insecticides or fertilizers there, everything is going to get ruined. And we are looking at some effects of that in the coast. This terrifying picture is a living island or seaweed sargasso that increased its size, and it's probably causing a social problem in Mexico because of some of the pollutants coming out of the aquifer out on the shore, and they grow out of proportion. So something similar happened some 1,000 years ago, another catastrophe caused by climate change, which is now very familiar for us. And we came across a year ago looking for a connection on an underwater flooded cave to this amazing cave, which is no other than the representation of the desperation of the Maya. It's a very hard place to explore, and we could make it just because we were looking for the water once again. The same as the ancient Maya did. And they placed this treasure. They placed this treasure of information in this cave, doing an amazing effort, maybe because they're desperate for water. So this is what they bring in these big incense burners. There's almost 200 of them inside this cave. I cannot imagine how they managed to place them there. And all this is something very interesting offered to the central Mexico Maya god, Tlaloc. What is a foreign god doing in the heart of the Mayan area? This god has been guarding this cave for over 1,000 years, we can tell. This is a treasure of information. There's a lot of things that we can discover with modern archaeological techniques, but thankfully we are not alone. We have National Geographic supporting this project, and I'm sure we will discover much more things about why the Maya collapsed in this time, what happened in Chichen Itza, who were the people that placed these offerings there. Thank you very much for support archaeology in National Geographic. It's, of course, National Geographic's DNA, and I'm very pleased and thankful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Memo. Next, we have a person I met at the bar yesterday, ecologist, conservationist, and National Geographic explorer, Paula Kahumbu. Welcome.
Morning, everyone. I come from a land of greatness. Africa's unique megafauna is a treasure for the whole world, and we're so blessed to have it. But it's under so much threat as well. It's not just climate change. It's not just the extinction crisis that we're experiencing. It's because Africa's wildlife doesn't have an African constituency to protect it, the animals and the places that they live in. I did my PhD on elephants. These are the most amazing animals. Anybody from the US and Europe knows and loves these animals because of Nat Geo, BBC, Disney Nature, all these great documentaries. But these animals are like us. They're like human beings, and we're very close to them in Africa. Our peoples believe that elephants are practically humans. We can relate to them. This is Kumquat. She's a matriarch of an incredible family. Just behind her is her daughter, Quay, and beneath her is Q-Tip. The day after, this photograph was taken of this extraordinary, calm, peaceful, and trusting family. Kumquat and her entire family were gunned down because of the demand for ivory half a world away, where people wanted to wear ivory trinkets. This incident made us furious. We launched a campaign called Hands Off Our Elephants to fight the ivory trade. It was so successful because we mobilized public support. In Kenya, we got every Kenyan to know that elephants needed their help. The government changed the laws. But it's not just elephants. All our animals are in trouble because the narrative that our people have in Africa is that animals are not friendly. Animals are your enemies. They kill you. So animals and people are always in tense relationships, and animals are being killed. This is the story that children are getting. This is their only narrative about wildlife. We've got to change that. So we're looking for those heroes like Richard Turere, a young man who invented a flashing light system to keep lions out of his father's homestead. He didn't just save cattle, he's saving lions because there's no more conflict. This young man is a superhero. He is the role model that thousands of children across Africa are looking at. So we're telling their stories through a movement called Wildlife Warriors. And I'm standing here representing this incredible movement of young Africans. We're starting in Kenya. And what we're doing is making documentaries about these amazing people. This is Fikiri Kiponda. Gave up a career as an accountant to save turtles because when he was a child, he stumbled on a nest of turtles running down to the beach. Our crew is African. We're telling African stories, taking these into classrooms and taking children out of classrooms and into the national parks. And we're mobilizing a group of young people to be part of this movement, taking children to the national parks. We're getting people onto the streets en masse to demand action from our government. Last month, we managed to get 4,000 people to march in the streets of Nairobi, and the next day we asked for the park to be open for free for Kenyans. 17,000 people showed up. The Wildlife Service was overwhelmed. Wildlife Direct is lighting a fire and igniting a movement across Africa to connect people to wildlife so that they treasure it and fight to save it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Paula's our only terrestrial speaker. We're trying to maintain the balance of earth and water. So our next speaker is a conservation biologist and National Geographic explorer, Archana Anand. Welcome.
Over 8 million tons of marine litter reach the global oceans every year. Just 10 rivers carry 92% of all the marine litter to these oceans. 8 of these rivers are in Asia, some in the country I was born in, India, and some in the country I now live in, China. Everyone is talking about plastic, but what about sewage? Do you know what happens to water that you flush when you use the bathroom? Over 90% of all the world's sewage that gets dumped into the ocean is completely untreated. Sewage is rich in nutrients that some plants and animals love and grow rapidly. They respire rapidly, and they deplete oxygen required for all life. This often results in ocean life literally gasping for breath. I grew up in Madras in India, watching the Bay of Bengal fall from grace as one of the most pristine oceans to one that is very polluted today. Not too far from there are the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, home to over 500 species of coral, several endemic, and 6 aboriginal human tribes. They are a cornucopia of life on this planet. Yet, they remain scientifically unexplored. Today, these islands see over 1 million tourists every year. And this has resulted in an enormous increase in the sewage dumped into the sea. So we have 2 problems. The first is we do not know what lives in the ocean. The second is we do not know how ocean life is changing with increasing pollution. Some of the most important creatures in the ocean are those that are invisible to the naked eye, yet are valuable markers of ocean health. In collaboration with the Smithsonian Institution, I deploy structures that resemble mini condominiums on the ocean floor. These blocks are about 9 inch by 9 inch in dimension and have tiny spaces for animals to crawl, hide, or settle into. After 1 year, I collect and identify everything that has colonized these plates using photography and their DNA. Cataloging these invisible creatures and documenting how their populations change with pollution gradients can give us scientific evidence to shed the spotlight on how we are degrading our coastal ecosystems and how we can mitigate threats in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Archana. Next, we have marine biologist, National Geographic explorer, and whale poop girl, Asha DeVos. Welcome.
About a decade ago, I fell in love with the largest animal that has ever roamed the planet. A filter feeder by nature with a tall, powerful vertical blow and a comically small dorsal fin attached to a never-ending back. The day I first set eyes on these blue whales off the southern coast of Sri Lanka, I was actually on the lookout for a different species. Sperm whales, with their left-tilted blow, wrinkly skin, and penchant for squid. I'd already spent some time with these animals when I'd eavesdropped on their secret lives by listening to their calls. And I was so fascinated that I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life studying them. But that was until I had this chance encounter with an aggregation of blue whales that showed me we had so much left to learn about the giants of our planet. But I promised myself I would return to my toothy friends, and my opportunity came knocking a couple of months ago. I headed off to the northwest coast of Sri Lanka with an incredibly experienced and capable team. And over the course of the next week, my mind was blown. Obviously, I knew that sperm whales were amazing animals, so there was no doubt in that. But as someone who'd spent 10 years studying blue whales, I realized I was in the unique position to compare and contrast these two species in this shared environment, the largest baleen whale and the largest toothed whale. And I was also reminded what an amazing part of the world I come from. So come with me to Sri Lanka, where blue whales aggregate to feed, but otherwise lead largely solitary lives. But sperm whales, they come together in these vast maternal groups. And they keep these maternal groups together by using communication, particularly patterned series of clicks called codas that they use to keep their groups together and tightly close. But blue whales, well, they don't vocalize quite so much. But when they do so in low rumbles that resemble jet engines. And blue whales will dive to hundreds of meters deep to feed on huge gulpfuls of tiny shrimp. But sperm whales, they dive to thousands of meters deep. And they've adapted to do so remarkably by basically they fold their rib cages, squish their lungs so they reduce those air pockets, and just before the dive, they exhale 90% of the air in their lungs, and off they go into these deep, dark places where they encounter giant squid. Maybe they even battle with this squid. But that's not the point. The point is they are feeding on things that can often be many times their size. A sharing platter rather than an individual meal. Unfortunately, these two species, their populations have been decimated in the past by whaling. And today their recovery is hindered by things like ship strike, noise pollution, entanglement, harassment by whale watching boats, and also people trying to swim with them. These are things that I'm trying to work on right now. But my point is this. If these two species, the giants of our oceans, have learned to live in harmony with one another in this shared space, a watery world with no defined boundaries, isn't it time that we learned to do the same? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Asha. Our final speaker for the day is someone I've looked up to all my life. And it's an honor to be welcoming onto the stage photographer, National Geographic Fellow, Brian Scarry.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Good morning. Culture is important. Family, food, friends, music, all very important to whales. Humpback whale moms whisper to their babies. Sperm whales celebrate their identity through dialect. And orca, these days, are getting takeout food from commercial fishing boats. My latest project is focused on whale culture. And I believe through that lens of culture, we can begin to see the ocean in a new way, a place where tradition and family matter. They matter tremendously. Here's a brief look at some of the visuals that I've done so far. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Work has not yet ended. This is just the beginning.
Our ecosystem was under threat, and so I decided then I'm going to do something about it.
The challenge is to be yourself. Forget about what others tell you and just go do it.
Women in our society face limitations in education. My goal is to change that.
Fear of taking risks, fear of failure. That's the biggest thing that stops girls from getting into this field.
There were some who tried to discredit my observations because I was a young, untrained girl.
I get to decide what I can and cannot do. We're pushing the boundaries for future generations.
For us to be down there together as three strong women achieving what we set out to do, it's not something I'll soon forget.
It's important to recognize the women that have paved the way for us today.
When students see people that look like them, it gives them that motivation that they need in order to say, you know what, I can go ahead and do this too.
When you educate a girl, you educate the world.
We cannot get to the best
possible exploration if we don't have the totality of people in the room to contribute to the conversation.
Please welcome Senior Vice President for Storytelling at National Geographic Society, Kaitlin Yarnall.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited for the next panel we have. We have 4 amazing and accomplished women, all working in conservation, all from the Global South. They have similar perspectives and similar experiences, yet they each work in very diverse communities. So I can't wait to bring them out. But before I do that, I want to recognize someone very special to the Explorer community. Can we please recognize Lyda Hill as a group? One year ago today on this stage, Lyda made a commitment. She made a commitment to women explorers at National Geographic. She dedicated $1 million to support women, to support them for things like training, professional development, and dependent care. These funds have gone to almost 115 explorers and have truly changed how they're able to do their work. They can network at conferences, they can get into the field longer without worrying about their dependents. So thank you, Lyda. And now to our panelists. Liliana Gutierrez is a marine conservationist and a Nat Geo explorer based in Mexico. Rebecca Kochulem is from the Baringo County Conservancies. She's their director for the Northern Rangelands Trust in Kenya. Intan Suci-Nurhati is a paleoclimate scientist, an oceanographer, and a Nat Geo explorer based in Indonesia. She's a recipient of one of Lyda's grants. And Erika Cuellar is a wildlife conservationist and Nat Geo explorer based in Bolivia. Welcome. All right. I just gave the briefest description of who you are and where you're from. I'd like you each to add a sentence or two more about your work and how you're here.
Thank you. Well, my name is Liliana. I'm from Mexico City, but I live now in the best place in the world, in La Paz, Baja California Sur. And I work in coastal communities with fisher villages, in fishing villages, and we work in both sides of the story to restore fisheries in the ocean with the technical and the science aspect of it, but what I consider most important, working also on land in the community with the fishermen and with their families, with the women, with the children, and trying to restore both the communities and the fisheries.
Rebecca?
Thank you. I'm Rebecca from Northern Kenya, a former conservancy manager with an experience of 9 years working with communities. Northern Rangelands Trust is a movement by communities to conserve the environment and to look at solutions into the issues that are affecting communities in Northern Kenya. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Intan. I'm a paleoclimate ocean scientist from the Indonesian Institute of Sciences. So what that means is I'm 1/3 climate scientist, I'm 1/3 oceanographer, and 1/3 scuba divers. But in seriousness, what I do is to provide climate data to the community at times and places where there is no observations. And I ask nature, unlocking information from corals as the history book of our ocean.
Hello, my name is Erika Cuellar. I am from Bolivia. I am a scientist who believes in the power of the people to change directions in conservation. So for me, people are crucial in our fight for conservation, and this is what I am working on, involving local people, indigenous people in the long-term conservation process in Latin America, and now I'm moving to the Arabian Peninsula.
So let's continue that thread of community. We have some images from each one of you of that show how you work with communities.
Yeah.
Liliana, you want to talk about your particular Mexican fisher community?
Yes. Actually, when I think on this question, it reminded me the reflection that Brent invited us all to do yesterday when he said it is important how we talk to each other, how to create these abundant spaces in which we can involve and we can talk about the things that really matter. So for me, what is the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge is how do we go from the shield of I know to the bridge of how can we learn together? Because there's nothing more inspiring than learning together. So in making connections, in working relationships, the ability to really deep listening, it's for me the biggest opportunity to exercise our empathy to, yes, fix problems, but most importantly, to design futures together.
Rebecca?
In Kenya, conservation in the past was about government. It was about a few people who really saw the benefits. But for me, working with community is about building relationships and making sure that our biggest issue was about insecurity in the region. And you know, when you don't have security and your people are not feeling safe, also the environment and the biodiversity is not safe. So for me, it's about looking at how can we make the people safe, and therefore how can we also now involve the communities to see the importance of wildlife and biodiversity. So working with communities, it was something that for myself when I finished the university I was like not prepared. But when I saw the kind of problems that we were facing in the community, it propelled me to see that we need to provide that platform. We need to have these communities to see that protecting the biodiversity is also an alternative source of livelihoods. So it makes a lot of difference when the communities own the process and they participate and they provide solutions to the issues that are affecting them. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I started as a hard scientist, I guess. I studied the issue of ocean acidification that's happening globally, but we didn't have any data about what's happening in Indonesia, in our backyard. And our backyard is just not any other backyard, it's Coral Triangle. We know that ocean acidification will influence coral reef and many other marine organisms that are made of shells, like pearl oysters and lobsters. Those are expensive stuff. So for us, it's just not about ecology. This is a story of economy. So when I put my monitoring station for ocean acidification, I put it next to pearl farms so that my data can be useful to them as well. But little did I know, as I entered this community, was that we have a common ground. Where I came from the ecology into economy, they are coming from economy to ecology, because pearl farm areas are actually arguably one of the best coral reef protection in Indonesia. They have to protect a wide area so that the bomber, the cyanide poison will not get into their area, and this is one of the best protected I've ever seen. So that's where we came from, and we come together that this data will be useful for me as well as for the community.
For me, working with the communities is the only way to do it in countries like mine, where you have 70% of indigenous people and where the law allows indigenous people to survive on wildlife. So you have these biodiverse, rich areas, and it's not only in Bolivia, but it's in Latin America. And you have this mix of rich, biodiverse, rich areas and local people living next or inside important areas. So how are you going to do conservation if you don't involve local people? For me, I always think in this phrase, Eduardo Galeano said in Spanish, in English, it's kind of like conservation without people is gardening. In Spanish sounds better. So
Go ahead in Spanish, Erika.
Conservación sin la gente, jardinería. Entonces, yeah. So for me, it's impossible not to involve indigenous people, and also because of the knowledge they have. So my job, my work, my entire time, it's to complement, try to learn how to complement their traditional knowledge in order for them to be recognized. So and also we talk about when brains go away from the countries, and we are losing those knowledge from those people because they are migrating. They don't have opportunities in their own places. So for me, as a scientist, as a conservationist, I cannot see myself working, dedicating my life to conservation without involving indigenous people in the long-term process.
Right. So I don't think it's a secret to anyone here that you have an all-woman panel sitting here. And in fact, it's the title of the panel. So let's address that. I want to hear some specific stories after meeting each one of you. I was struck by, Rebecca, your story of you truly are a groundbreaker, the first female director in Northern Rangelands Trust. How did you start that? How did you gain the trust of the communities? What was your breakthrough moment?
Actually, starting as a conservancy manager back then when the country was pretty new about the conservation model as driven by the community. 9 years ago, it was pretty hard because back then we didn't have policies, we didn't have legislations that support the community to protect wildlife, let alone the issues that were affecting the community. For example, the insecurity. We treasure livestock, we treasure cattle. It's the medium of exchange. So it was really heartbreaking to see that these are the issues that also are now driving the conflict around that area. It was about pasture, it's about grazing, and all this because of the overgrazing and the overstocking, the animals were not getting enough pasture. So it was about building the relationships with the community, earning their trust, and being a woman, it's very hard because for us, a woman is a second class. You're not like hard, and then you're young. So it was about like listening, providing that listening ear, for example, to the elders, and be able to accommodating their criticism at times, and be able to let them understand what are the benefits. If you conserve, for example, a giraffe, in our case where I used to work, they saw tourism coming in. They saw the attachment. But when the kids go and see this wildlife for the first time, because the wildlife were like poached because of the people using it for food. So when they saw the wildlife coming in and people coming to see it and the children going to see them, it brought a sense of attachment and a sense of this is what we lost and it's coming back. This is the only chance that we have to protect our wildlife. So during that 9-year period, it made me to understand that you need to reach out to these communities. You need to make them understand why they need to protect the biodiversity. So coming into the position of being a director, it's like now scaling up and making sure that we make our communities understand why we need to protect this wildlife and why we need to protect our biodiversity.
It's beautiful. Yeah. So why are the giraffes in a boat? That's just what we all want to know. Why are the giraffes in a boat? Short version?
Yes, these were the translocation we did in 2011. Having tried to convince the community and be able to understand the need to protect the biodiversity. These giraffes are the Rothschild giraffe, endangered species, and several decades from the stories I had, they were roaming in that landscape. And because of poaching and the population pressure, they disappeared from that landscape. And so from the building that foundation, dialogue, and making this community understand the need to protect the species, they accepted and requested government to bring back the species. So actually, the community went to the government, the KWS, and asked for the translocation of these species back to the environment. And currently now, that was a holding space they put the wildlife. So they've now, last year, during the participation, like the local participation from the community, they set aside land, a big land, to make sure that now these species can now rewild and come back to the community.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So it's a process of making sure that you build that trust, you earn that trust so that they can accept to have the wildlife. Yeah.
Intan, you mentioned this briefly, that your early work and most of your work focused on filling in data gaps, right? Data that just didn't exist. But the thing that I most love about what you told me is that you've now shifted your focus. You're still doing that, but you've shifted your focus to storytelling and explaining why it matters. What was that moment? What made you change?
Yeah. So the first mission from Nat Geo was to establish the first ocean acidification monitoring, hard data science. And then Little Hill have this generous program, support for women and dependent care. And that encouraged me to go further, something not business as usual, normal science that I do. So what I want to do with this is something different. So let's transform scientific knowledge into the hands of policymakers. So right now I'm basically transforming it into a policy brief, talking with people on local level, but also going up to the national levels. Because ocean acidification is a hard issue to remember. It's an slow onset changes. So unless someone keep reminding and putting it in policy, I think it will be easily forgotten.
Right. And Liliana, turning to you, you started working with men, correct? How many years did you do that before eventually you were able to pull the women in?
I'm 42, so probably I've been doing this for 22 years now, and it wasn't until 6 years ago that I began working more intensively with women.
And why the shift, and why so recently?
Yeah. Well, I work when I began working together with my organization. First thing I knew when I told my husband when we were going to be working was, he asked me, "Why are you going to work in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in La Paz if you just arrived and you don't know anything about the place? And do you know that all the illegal fishermen live there?" So I was like, okay, it sounds like a very exciting work. And we learned a lot. We created those, we were so great, we were so fortunate to being able to create together with the community those spaces where we could discuss the things that really matter in a very human way. They self-imposed a ban for 6 years, and they recovered the fishery. They've been fishing again the pencils for 2 years now. And when the banks began to grow, of course, a lot of poaching began to happen again. And for men, it was kind of difficult to stop that because they had been illegal fishermen themselves. So they were like, "Why are we going to do this? If we know we need to protect these," but at the same time, there was a conflict inside them. For women, it was amazing. First of all, the courage. They would go and say, "This is the results of our effort. We need to stand for this. We need to defend the bank we've been taking care of." And second, we're not gonna do this because we're against the other fishermen. Actually, we should go to those villages and help them to do the same with their resources. But we're gonna do this. So that was the shift. When I saw the huge potential for teamwork, courage, creativity, intensity, and this courage to do what you need to do every day. They began the first anti-poaching unit made only by female in Mexico to defend the fishery. And in 2 months, and this is all recorded. I'm not overreacting to the emotion I feel for being in this panel. This is recorded. In 2 months, they contain the illegal poaching of their shells. Not only that, now that they have recovered that place, they are thinking on designing a little protected area in which they can invite people of La Paz to enjoy the estuary that used to be a dangerous place for them. And now they're being trained to be bird watchers guides. Wow. So to them. So it went from an anti-poaching unit of women to a true citizens engagement effort to recover our spaces. And let me tell you, in countries like Mexico, these little steps, these little examples are so important to transform our society.
Wonderful. Erika, you're a biologist and a conservationist, but you're a teacher, right? You train, and similar to Liliana, you started training all men. Why all men?
I haven't had a choice. I mean, I was surrounded by hunters, and also, but it wasn't a problem for me because I had a wonderful father and especially a wonderful mother who treat us, my brothers and myself, like we had to do the same thing. So I didn't have that problem. But I have to learn how to get into the society I was going to work with, because women have the right to tell their men, you're not going to that woman for hunting, you know. So I had to wait in the community for about 2 months and just let women know me before they allow me to go with their men. During the hunting, and it is completely normal. I mean, if I was one of the wives, it's normal, I guess. But for me, curiosity and research, it doesn't have gender. I mean, for me, I expend the most happy years in my life working with all the hunters and in that area. So I always wanted to involve women. I failed because I wrote, 100 proposals. And I always wanted to involve women. But it's the society I'm working with. So it's part of the respect you bring to these communities to just act as they... even if I am not agree, you know, it's the way they do. But when you work with them, you realize women have the power there. And also what was very important for me was that the knowledge it was very, very well established. I work with hunters, I hunt with them, I eat what they hunt to learn. But women knew about reproduction, seasonality. They knew all about that. Why? Because hunters bring the animals to women, and they just prepare them. So they know everything. They know what size of the armadillos, how many armadillos, which species. So the knowledge is amazing. It's complementary, and I learned that. It was difficult, but for me, as I said, science doesn't have frontiers or gender, so you know, it's not a problem for me.
It's not a binary decision. Yeah.
I don't know, and that because I want them to see me as a professional biologist, as a scientist, and. So maybe they see me differently, but I just try not to get involved in that. We have too many challenges and issues to deal with when we are trying to do conservation. So I forget I am a woman. I'm just a scientist.
So we've got this light blinking at us because we're going to get kicked off stage in 2 minutes. So I want to ask you all the same question, and I want you to try to answer in 1 to 2 words, right? And you don't know what's coming. But there's so much discussion and worthy discussion around the difficulties of being the first woman in a field or the only woman in a field. But I also think you've all touched on the fact that it's a strength, right? It gives you a different perspective, different skills, different access and trust in the community. So in 1 to 2 words, what would be an adjective you'd use or a word you'd use to describe what the strength, what the relative advantage it is of being a woman in your field? Anyone can go. And I know you're all working in your second language too, so I apologize.
I would say exercising empathy.
Wonderful.
And being open.
That's way more than 2.
To change.
Exercising empathy, you would have just won right there. Yeah. Okay.
I would say that you need to be patient and have a listening ear.
Patient and listening. Yeah. Wonderful.
I would say keep going further and further and further.
So persistence.
Yes.
Never be afraid. I mean, I'm always afraid when I start something, but just carry on. I mean, yeah.
Fearlessness, yeah?
Yeah, I didn't have the right word, but yeah.
Wonderful.
You look like that, and carry on, even if you are trembling like I'm now.
Well, ladies, you are inspirational, not because you're women, but because you're women and your work is phenomenal. And so it's been a pleasure to share the stage with you. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kaitlin, and your extraordinary League of Women. Now, as we look back at the last 3 days, we are on to our last topic for the morning. It's about a new narrative for nature. And this is about the drivers for biodiversity loss. I know it sounds depressing, but it's not going to be, right? How can we create a new story to get people engaged and inspired to take action? To introduce this panel, may I please welcome Amiga Mexicana, Senior Director for Latin America at the National Geographic Society, Gael Almeida.
Thank you, Sandwich. So, we're going to... I'm very excited to introduce this amazing, last but not least, panel of incredible explorers that are going to talk to us about how they are creating new narratives. They're inventing new ways to tell us new stories so that we can really create a connection and empathy with the natural world. So let's jump into it because we have very limited time. To begin with, we will hear from National Geographic fellow Chris Golden.
We need a new narrative for nature. What I'm here to propose is that environmental conservation is the best public health intervention. Planetary health is a new field that explores the human health impacts of environmental change, whether looking at biodiversity loss, climate change, or land use change. Planetary health scientists are interested in examining these types of ecosystem transformations and their impacts on human health. The World Health Organization estimates that 1/4 of the entire burden of disease could be avoided through improved ecosystem management. This, to me, provides us with an enormous opportunity to correct certain health ills through protecting and managing our natural systems. It's a bit false for me to present in a section entitled New Narratives for Nature. Planetary health conceptualization is deeply rooted in Indigenous knowledge. And so I owe a debt of gratitude to the amazing team and wonderful people that I've been working with over the past 20 years in Madagascar. I really see my role as assigning values and data to tell their stories of planetary health. And so it's in this spirit that I'll continue the rest of my presentation. These are some of the threats that we're facing. Globally, 40% of insect species are in decline. Researchers in Europe have found that insect species have experienced a 75% decline in abundance over the past 30 years. Similarly, wildlife populations have declined by 60% over the past 50 years. These are not statistics that are important just for biodiversity. They're critically important for human well-being and human health. Without insects, pollinated crops will decline or collapse. Without wildlife, people who rely on bushmeat for nutrition in the developing world will lack this resource. This is the type of research that I'd been doing for the past 10 years. And over that time, I began seeing headlines like this, and I wondered to myself, to what extent was the work that I was doing in rural, remote rainforests of Madagascar parallel to what was happening in the oceans? And I really got thinking about all of the statistics that were happening. Since 1996, fish catch has declined by 1 million metric tons per year. We also know that climate change has deep impacts on fish catch. Sea temperature rise will bring fish populations from the equator toward the poles. And as that happens, and as you can see here in the red area highlighted on the map along the equatorial belt, fish catch is expected to decline by 50% by 2050. As a public health specialist, when I look at this map, I see the very areas that we care the most about food insecurity and where there's a looming food crisis in our future. We need a new narrative for our oceans. More marine protected areas will help to safeguard biodiversity and replenish fish stocks that will feed the billions of people that rely on seafood for nutrition. This is something that we need to do. We need to reframe conservation as a public health intervention. This extends beyond the oceans. Forests are also critical for human health. I recently co-authored a study that analyzed data from 300,000 children in 35 different countries. What we found was that protecting upstream forests improved water quality downstream and reduced the incidence of diarrheal diseases. This is one of the major killers of children worldwide. And we found that forest conservation was actually equivalent in impact to many types of public health interventions. These are the types of stories we need to tell to create empathy for nature and to broaden the constituencies of those who care about it. It's not just about infectious disease or nutrition. It's also about mental health. Nature plays a major role in protecting our mental health. Solastalgia is defined as mental or existential distress driven by environmental degradation. And so we need more protected areas. We need green design of our cities. We need a more proactive approach to integrating nature into youth education and lifestyles to restore and protect our global mental health. National Geographic's orientation around a planet in balance is exactly what I mean by planetary health. National Geographic initiatives like 30 by 30 will do more than protect biodiversity. It will also protect the health and well-being of every person on this planet and future generations to come. Last week, the Juliana 21 young Americans, made their next steps in a case against the US government. The case was founded on the principle that they deserve the same protections as the Constitution provides everyone else: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The suit has promised them, the suit that they are intending to bring to the US government is in a hope that they'll be able to receive these same benefits in the future. And yet our current ecological transformations are preventing that safe space in the future from ecological change. They're demanding action now for protected areas and for us to follow climate-friendly policies so that they can live in a future that ensures their health and well-being. I find hope in this next generation to recognize the importance of nature and to protect and restore our planetary health. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Please now welcome Gautam Shah, National Geographic Fellow.
So when we were young, no one needed to make the case for nature for us. No one needed to explain the value of animals. All our books, our toys, our movies, our clothes, they were all about animals because they instinctively touched our hearts. But then we grew up, and other things like television, games, boyfriends and girlfriends started to demand our attention. Meanwhile, here we are, facing the extinction of the natural world and thinking about how can we make this important again. The good news is that there's actually a lot of evidence that animals and wildlife still capture our imagination. But with all these things competing for our time and for our attention, maybe it's, I didn't expect that reaction. Maybe it's not our role to justify or to defend or to make the case for nature, so much as it is to find new storytelling channels that are much more embedded into our daily lives. So after a career of 20 years in IT consulting, I finally decided to quit my perfectly good job and see whether we couldn't figure out how to do that. And one of the first things that I learned, and we're learning a lot about here this week, is all the advances in technology that allow us to generate multi-dimensional data about animals and habitats that we could never before have imagined. Drones let us recreate environments in 3D down to the individual bush. AI lets us comb through millions of photographs in a matter of seconds and identify individual animals simply from their spot patterns. And evidently, from space, we can count penguins. And hidden in all this scientific data is actually a treasure of stories just waiting to be told. So here's an example of a story of two lions based on just very simple GPS data.
Fleur and Valentine are sisters who live with their 6 adolescent cubs near Lake Elementita. As a pride, they remain close to each other 90% of the time for protection, cooperative hunting, and social bonding. When Valentine is ready to find a mate, she makes 2 trips into the adjoining Nakuru National Park. She remains in the area for approximately 3 days each time, probably accompanied by a male lion. On her second trip back to her pride, we see that something is blocking her way. The once non-functioning electric fence has been fixed, and she cannot get through. Valentine becomes stressed and hungry and nearly dies. Researchers intervene to transport Valentine back to Fleur and the rest of the pride. Soon after, she gives birth to 3 new cubs.
Now we want to take this type of data and make it far more interactive in a way that incentivizes people to come back and watch these type of things on a daily basis. And I can think of no better channel to try and do that than games. 2.4 billion people since I made this slide around the world play games. And almost none of those games are about nature or wildlife. Now, we spend millions of dollars every year creating nature documentaries, and I'm not at all saying that that's unjustified. But spending almost nothing trying to penetrate this market has always felt to me, borderline irresponsible. So we are currently working on our first full commercial game called Wildiverse. Wildiverse is a mobile, augmented reality game that sends you on missions to play the scientists studying apes in Congo and Borneo. You explore green spaces within your own city to try and track these animals and support the organizations that work with them. So think Pokemon Go, but with chimpanzees and orangutans. But where the animal characters are real, the habitats are real, and the researchers that work with them are real. So what you're looking at here is an example of how we're trying to recreate the feeling of tracking Theo the orangutan through your mobile phone. Oops. Well, anyhow, you've seen the slide ahead of time. The experiences that we create can range from educational to whimsical, but they always focus on the data that all of you are already gathering to try and bring people into worlds that they're unfamiliar with, not unsimilar to the way that concerts or television or sports might do. So Could you use your Fitbit to compete with Moituri the elephant on who took the most steps today? Or could you teach geography or geometry through a real-time virtualization of Gorongosa National Park? Or maybe could you place bets on the annual migration of Arctic terns? And how could those experiences turn into or catalyze new business models that finance conservation work on the ground? Technology and data are on our side. We just have to use them to find storytelling approaches that are more relevant to our daily lives right now. So we're going to continue to build upon these concepts until Fleur the lion and Chili the gibbon are as important as Beyonce and Lionel Messi and Game of Thrones. Because when we do that, that's when we'll know that we're truly making the case for nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Gautam. Now, please welcome our last presenter, National Geographic Fellow, Anand Varma.
As a kid, I was obsessed with aquariums. I had 7 aquariums in my home. I set up an aquarium in my middle school classroom. And the day I turned 14, I got a work permit so I could start my job at Wildside Pets, my local aquarium store. There is something about staring into a glowing box of life that calms me down. It focuses my attention, and it puts me in a mood to ponder the questions of the universe. This particular aquarium happens to be in my home in Berkeley. I started this fellowship project on jellyfish with David Gruber in New England. And he introduced me to Steve Spina at the New England Aquarium, who has become an incredible jelly mentor to me. And there was a day last year where I realized I could be doing this project back home. So I called my mom, and she boxed up and shipped the equipment that had been in my parents' basement for 20 years. I inherited these jelly tanks from David Lichwager, who had just finished a story for National Geographic. And I had Steve ship me a box of jellies from Boston so I could reconnect with my childhood love. Now, to make space for these new housemates, I hired an assistant, Mark Unger, who used to work with the education team here. And together, we rebuilt the backyard storage shed I have into a makeshift jellyfish lab. And there's something about learning to care for these creatures that creates a kind of intimacy with them. For example, this little week-old baby moon jelly pulsing in a single drop of water. You spend all day, every day, staring at this little creature, and you start to wonder, how does this little creature know where it is? How does this little creature know where to go? It turns out the answer to those questions are in these little black dots at the base of its tentacles. In those little black dots is a gypsum crystal lying on a bed of sensory hairs. And together, that crystal and those hairs form a gravity sensor that tells this little baby jellyfish what direction it's pointing. So as this jellyfish swims through the ocean, that little crystal rolls around that bed of hairs, reminding it which way is up and which way is down. And it turns out that little gravity sensor is so similar to the gravity sensor in our inner ear that NASA sent 2,500 baby jellyfish into space to try to better understand how life is affected by microgravity. So here you have a grown-up moon jelly, and that gravity sensor is tucked in that little notch along the margin of its bell. This creature looks nothing like us. And yet, we share one important thing in common. We all need to figure out which way is up and which way is down. So, if we can learn from a jellyfish about life in outer space, what else can we learn from nature? Thank you.
I'm going to ask Chris and Gautam to join us again on stage so that we can start this conversation. That was powerful. Thank you so much, the three of you. To begin with, I'm really intrigued. What is your short definition, your understanding of what means creating empathy with the natural world? And we can start with you, Chris.
Sure. For me, I think that there's this undeniable feeling that you have when you go out into nature. It's something that I first experienced going on nature walks with my mom when I was little, and there's a sense of awe and wonder and discovery. And I think that for me is the best way of describing that kind of empathy, that you connect with nature.
Yeah, very similar. And I think it's about how do you create this feeling of being part of something, even though it might be far away. So it's not, although the National Geographic explorers, they're out, they're doing their stuff, and somehow I should care about it. Like, how can I in some way feel part of it, no matter where I live?
Well, I think connection is central to everything that I work on. But I want to take a second to talk about empathy, because I think empathy is just one of those ways of connection, probably the most powerful. But, I was reading Aldo Leopold's Sand County Almanac this last year, and in it he describes cooking deer meat in bear fat over a campfire. And to me, he is one of the most important voices in conservation of the last 100 years, but I wouldn't use the word empathy to describe that activity. And I don't aspire to kill a bear or a deer, but it struck me that there is a lot of different ways to connect to the natural world. And I certainly try to create videos and photographs that allow you to put yourself into the experience of an individual, but I try to think about how to make content that allows people to connect to it in their own way.
Mm-hmm. Gautam, there's a craziness going on with video games. There's Nintendo Switch, Nintendo whatever, Atari, like every single, Pokemon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So how do we make this nature video games a trend? How do we put them on the mainstream so that everybody wants to play with those?
I think the hardest thing about making the games, quite honestly, it's not that hard. There's a lot of work that's going out there on how you gamify, and we can gamify anything. What's really hard is the marketing and the positioning of it. So if you position, and there's a fine balance, but if you position it as a game for nature, or if you position it as a game for education or something like that, you've immediately boxed yourself in. And yes, you will definitely get the people that are interested in a game for nature, and for sure that will be fine, but you will not have reached a larger audience because they will immediately be like, oh, that's not for me. So there's a fine balance between making sure that it still is a game for nature, but it's marketed as this is just as fun as anything else that you might be playing, and it's something that you really, really inherently want to do. And then let the conservation and the nature and these type of stories come through. But first and foremost, you've got to make it fun. But then two, you need to make sure that when you're marketing it and when you're positioning it, that you're positioning it in the same way that other commercial products are positioned.
There's a story about Chris that when he was 9 years old, he had to do an homework, I think it was an assignment for school, and you did the research of lemurs, right? And then I was reading this interview that then he ended many years later connecting his first interest and research with lemurs with a malnourished child in Madagascar. How can you make that connection? How that happened?
I think that my interests have always been very much directed toward the protection and the enjoyment of the natural world. But it's been a circuitous route since then. I did an animal project on the ring-tailed lemur in 3rd grade and fell in love with lemurs, and went to Madagascar my first time when I was 16, and have been every year since then. And when I first started working in the Northeast, I can remember that I had been reading Gerald Durrell's book, The Aye, and I had just this enormous fascination with the aye and had wanted to see it. And the first one that I saw was in a hunter's trap and then was being spit roasted over a fire. And for me, it was this terrible experience that turned my stomach, and I very much felt this visceral reaction to that experience. And I knew that I needed to begin working more creatively and innovatively to seek conservation solutions. And so now my position's at a school of public health directed at protecting the health of humanity and focusing on nutrition, but it is also very much trying to find co-beneficial solutions between the two. And so I never thought that I'd end up studying dead animals in the way that I am as food, but it is all about trying to find those connections and those co-benefits between what I think are the two most important things in the world: global biodiversity preservation and human health.
Interesting. Thank you. Anand, every time I see the videos you're creating, and my understanding is that you also create the music, sometimes, not always.
I'm not a musician.
And you create also a narrative, no? So you're using different techniques. You're using the photos, you're using the videos, the music, the narrative, and you connect all of those pieces and create what we just saw. So how do you create them? How do you think about them? Like,
at the beginning, the videos that I made for these projects were actually side projects. They weren't the main goal of the work. It was just little experiments I was running on the side. And the music that I found, I don't create the music, but I find it by accident. I found it by accident in the beginning. And I started to recognize the kind of feeling that it can create when you share it with somebody. And I started realizing, oh, the feeling is actually the most important part. And so when I present this work, I'm including the context, I'm including the information, but I don't expect to be administering a science test at the end of it. But I recognize how the information actually creates a deeper connection. It gives this context to enhance the emotional experience, which in the end feels like the most important part.
yes. So this is the last panel. I see that we have like 1 minute. So to close this incredible symposium festival, what will be the, tweet line, piece of advice for all of us, based on your experience, to go out there and connect and create that empathy? What would you recommend us to do?
For me, it's been a process of reflection. I didn't know anything in advance about what was the right path or what was the most interesting. It was kind of all looking backwards and realizing, oh, wait, this thing that I thought I had to do for my job or for my career or for this thing has meant something to me. And so you're almost learning from your own experience what is the right direction to keep going.
Yeah. For you, Gautam?
Advice to everyone. Yeah, well, advice. One of the things I guess I would say is, as you're thinking about the work that you're doing and you're wanting to communicate it to a larger audience, really just first think about the audience and how will they relate to the work that you're doing, and then think about, okay, how can I then communicate this work to that particular audience?
That's a really good piece of advice. And for you, Chris?
Mine is that I think that we are really just scratching the surface in terms of understanding the many benefits that nature can have on us, and that the next frontier of exploration might be uncovering some of those connections.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause. And thank you. Let's go. Thank you.
Well, that was extraordinary, right? I mean, just watching those jellyfishes pulsing. What an incredible 3 days it's been. A big round of applause to all our explorers, speakers, panelists. Thank you all. To our live stream audiences. It's been fascinating. Now we've got to do a quick little wrap up. Now, all those images up on the screen just didn't happen magically. Those guys in the back, they did a great job over there. David, Justin, John, Christian, thank you all very much. So an event like this, there's a lot of moving parts, right? And there's a big team there who've been working hard to get the explorers into town, bring them all here, and to run this whole symposium. So I'd like to quickly thank Alex Moen and the Explorer Programs team. Thank you. Stacey England and the Global Events team, thanks very much. And for all those volunteers out there just working so hard, just keeping things in track, and the security guards who finally let me in here. Yeah. And there's a great team of people back here who've been pushing me onto the stage and pulling me back. Jessa, Maria, Steph, Tim, Carmen, and of course to Liz Filippone, who put this whole program together. Big round of applause. Well, I've enjoyed being a host here for all of you. Thank you for having me and tolerating me. Now I get a free ticket back home to India. And I hope all of you come here next year for the symposium again. And don't forget Tyrion's last words. There's nothing in the world more powerful than a good story. Have fun. A quick reminder, there's the Everest mapping team at 12 o'clock in the cafeteria, so go check that out. Bye, enjoy.